It's interesting that you ask this question when the problems in the Chinese housing market and the state-owned enterprises might be about to unleash havoc on the global economy right now. And that tells you something important about China, which I think many lose sight of when they want a one-dimensional answer to this question. China is a mixed economy. It's mixed because it's got fairly ruthless free markets in many areas, but it's also got these old state-owned enterprises and based on government borrowing, which has increased rapidly in the last few years, and very large infrastructure projects. So what created the health, the success story of China in the past 30 years? Well, it was the fact that they began to dismantle the command economy. And that didn't happen from the top. I know this is the popular story now in the Chinese Communist Party, but also around the world, that we have those wise planners who sort of nourished and guided the economy to success. That's not at all what happened. What happened was that local villages basically said, we are starving with these communes and without being able to do private business. So we are secretly privatizing our land. It was so secret that they even promised one another that if word ever got out, those who do not end up in labor camps because of this privatization will take care of the kids of those who do end up in those camps. They started to small village enterprises, and what the Communist Party did under Deng Xiaoping, and this was his great wisdom, was that when he saw that this was already taking place and everybody wanted to do this, that it was a success story. And instead of putting them in labor camps who were pioneers, he said that, okay, I guess this is better than starvation and misery, so let's allow more people to do the same things. And then experimenting with it at the margins of the Chinese economy, like, for example, the export processing zones. That's where we saw the great multinational Chinese productive companies being born. So all of this happened outside of the plan, outside of what was expected or even predicted by the Communist Party. And that's where we got all the growth in new employment, in exports, in wealth in China. So capitalism is the reason why China was so successful. But the problem is that once you are that successful, you can also afford some major mistakes. You can afford some of these large-scale state-owned enterprises that basically just destroy resources all the time. And that's what we're seeing as well. And now there's a faction in China in control who want more of that, want more of government industrial policy. And that will not be a success story. That will be utter failure, I think.
So the socialist policies are actually holding the country back. And it's based on capitalism that they succeeded to the degree they have. I mean, if they embraced it more, they would probably be growing even faster. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there are things like they called economic zones, free economic zones in China, in a place like, I believe, in Shanghai. And not a lot of people know this, but in a free economic zone, you pay almost no tax whatsoever, and there's almost no regulation whatsoever.
That's correct. And this is the thing that created this rapid transition in the Chinese economy. The Communist Party said, oh, look, it seems like they're doing something wrong in the local villages when they're toying with private business. And they also looked to their neighbors, to Singapore, to Taiwan, and realizing capitalism seems to be very efficient at creating wealth. So perhaps we should allow some of it. But they didn't want to risk the whole plan. And that's why they didn't implement these free zones in in Beijing or in one of those major cities. They took small places like the old fishing village Shenzhen, close to Hong Kong, for example, just 30,000 inhabitants. But once they were so free, enterprise exploded and people moved there. There was massive migration to these places. So this old fishing village that had 30,000 villages now has almost 10 million inhabitants. And so, in other words, the planned economy couldn't survive such a great success story. So they had to implement some of those policies in the rest of the economy as well.
Just for interest's sake, when they calculate the index of economic freedom of a country, do they factor in the free economic zones? Because obviously, if they don't, that number can be very inaccurate.
That's right. No, it's a lot of complicated measurements where you have to look at how large a proportion of businesses are affected by these laws and other laws and taxes and no taxes. So that's difficult, and I don't know if someone has done that completely accurate just yet, but
yeah,
we come close to it.
Yeah, perhaps I should study more of those data that they use for the index of economic freedom. But another country that is underrated and a global figure is India, and it's a main opponent to China. And not a lot of people talk about India. Do you believe? What is your opinion on the economy of India, and do you think it's possible that India might one day eclipse China?
I definitely think there is that possibility. Just a couple of years ago, I did a documentary called India Awakes, which looked at some of the similar things that were going on in China in the 1970s, how they were happening in India right now, how villages began to secretly privatize, to do business, to trade. And India has done quite a lot in opening up its economy, but they did it 10 years later. China started in the late 1970s, India started in the early 1990s. So they are a little bit behind when it comes to these things, but I think there is a chance that it will be more sustainable in the long term, precisely because of what people think is a more chaotic Indian system of many different localities and different points of view, and well, the chaos of democracy, so to speak, because it means that they are not completely dependent on what a single ruler thinks. If Xi Jinping wakes up one day and thinks that, oh, the tech sector is too big, then he destroys it, and that's the end of it. And now he's in some sort of Maoist persecution of successful entrepreneurs everywhere, and that can only result in misery. I think there is a chance that the greater personal freedoms in India will protect more of private initiative and individual creativity. And I mean, it's a country that's still growing. Its population is growing while it is declining in China right now quite rapidly, and the workforce is getting smaller. So if I had to bet long term, I'd bet on India.
That's interesting. So basically, because India has a more federal system, it might have a better chance in the future.
I think that there's a greater chance that India will allow trial and error to go ahead. Whereas at least with the present system of Xi Jinping's personality cult and very authoritarian centralized system since around 2013, China doesn't allow that. One of the reasons why China was successful was that they actually learned from the Maoist period, even in the Communist Party, that, okay, we should allow different opinions within the party. And when we change our mind, we can change policy as well. Because when you have more of an anonymous collective leadership, no single person loses face. But Xi Jinping, it'll be very difficult for him because he's the savior and the guardian of everything. Can he ever be wrong? I don't think so. So if he makes major mistakes, he will continue to do that. Whereas the back and forth and the divisions between the center and the states in India and the normal procedures of a chaotic democratic process with opposition parties and so on, it makes it more difficult to adjust your course if you make mistakes.